and welcome to Blue Ridge Bookfest Book Reviews. Today we're talking with my friend Bill Ramsey and his good friend Angela Leigh Tucker. Bill wrote the book, Me Now, Who Next? It's a story about Angela and her recovery from traumatic brain injury. And I want to start with Bill because how did you meet Angela and what moved you to write this story?
Thanks for asking that question, Renee. I met Angela after the car crash that she was involved in that left her with a traumatic brain injury and numerous broken bones, near death, when she returned to Hendersonville from New York City to live with her father in Laurel Park during her initial recovery period of rehab that she was taking at Care Partners in Asheville and other rehab locations around the community here. When I met her at a Public Relations Association meeting. She'd been a vice president of a public relations firm in Manhattan and was 4 months after the car crash eager to get back involved with the community as a part of her self-rediscovery. And the first meeting I recall in November of 2008 was one that she came on the arm of her father with a sling, a cane, a crooked smile, a yet-to-heal tracheotomy hole in her throat. Vision problems. She was really game for showing up. Each month that she came back, she was making progress. After 4 months, I asked if I could write her story. She thought about it, got back to me and said, yes, I'd be pleased if you would. At the time that I made that offer, I had no idea really what kind of person she was because I had not known her before. I discovered the Angela that we all have come to love and watched her battle through the next couple of years. And the reason I wanted to write this story goes back to my desire to understand at this point in my life why some people confronted by a challenge, a divorce, job loss, an illness, some sort of disaster in their lives, throw up their hands and give up, while other people choose to fight on. And I could clearly see that Angela was an unparalleled fighter, and that's why I wanted to discover her story.
Well, I want to start with Angela. You meet this man, you've known him for 4 months. What are the thoughts that had to go through your mind when he asked you to write your story, and how has your relationship evolved over this time now?
Bill Ramsey is a dear, dear friend. He grew to be much more than a great driver. He became a real important part of my rehabilitation, to be able to collect the information and pieces of who I was that I wasn't able to recall, really helped me piece my story together, my past that was temporarily misplaced. And I feel that his book, this opportunity, was also to pay homage to my recovery team. I consider the long line of angels and strangers who came together to protect and rebuild my life. They're my recovery team. And in his book, he does a great, excellent job of capturing a lot of those angels, and I'm grateful to be able to give them the true attention that they deserve.
Well, this was a lot of work on your part, Bill.
It was a labor of love, and I got to tell you, I entered into it with some trepidation. After I said what I said, Angela, I'd like to write your story, I realized not only did I not know much about her, I knew nothing about brain injuries. So it was a search and discover kind of thing where Angela and I would go to Brain Injury Association conferences, and I began reading quite a number of learned books on the subject, and it all kind of went in parallel. So as I began to know more about her, I also began to know more about the situation that she was confronted by.
Well, when you started, now Angela just alluded to the fact that you helped her rebuild her past. How did you do that?
To me, the most memorable moment was the trip that we made to New York. Her first trip back by car for an extended stay, I drove. And we're up.
Excellent driver.
We're up in. Keep in mind, a tractor trailer had jumped a median, killed her husband on the scene, and nearly killed her. So she gets in the car. I have a little lucky frog that I keep on the dashboard. She focused on that and said, "Let's go." We're driving up through Virginia. She compliments my driving, and she's on the way back to New York where she had lived, remembering things about New York and her life. And as we're going along, she'll say, "That's a memory. Wow, that's a memory." So it was like rediscovery, and I was just so privileged to be there at that moment.
Now, I remember the first day you and I talked about this. You had me in tears. We were sitting at the Ugly Mug, and you started to tell me all about this. But one of the things you talked about that I really want us to take a little aside is you told me that what you had thought about people in New York City turned out to be not what was the real New York City person.
Absolutely. I had the typical, I would say typical, view of New York City in particular and big cities in general, only to discover that marvelous people were all around her there. Angela is a friend magnet, and I describe it that way in the book. Once you know Angela, you don't want to let go, and she won't let go of you. I don't mean it in an uncomplimentary way at all. It's just something that you want to sustain. The friendship flows in both directions, and what people came forward to do was simply amazing.
Well, do you still, now you live in New York, do you still have that kind of support?
Yes, very much so. I'm grateful. I seem to have two groups of friends. Former friends who knew my life prior to the accident, and then all of those angels who came into my life after. And so the way I refer to it is Angela 1 died on July 31st, 2008, and Angela 2 was born that same night. Angela 1 and 2 are very different people. Angela 1 was a vice president of a PR firm, had 2, 3, 10 things on her plate at once. Angela 2, because of my inability to multitask now, I sleep more, I get lost more frequently, but I'm a rock star. I've definitely exceeded anyone's expectations, including my own. So the friends who have come into my life afterwards are primarily from my spiritual center, Unity of New York, a lot of friends from church, a lot of friends through Rehabilitation, the gym. So they're those who knew my former self, Angela 1, and have a relationship with that past. I'm no longer that person, and it's okay. I no longer have the dire need to reconnect with friends of a former self.
Well, Bill, because of all of the research that you did, what were some of the issues with regard to traumatic brain injury that you've learned? Because I can tell you've become quite an advocate for survivors.
Well, and Angela has too. That's her chosen career path, at least for the next several years, and she's becoming nationally recognized as an advocate for brain injured people, traveling to Washington, D.C. Annually and to state association meetings and other meetings around the city of New York. So I'm following in her footsteps as I advocate for people, because one of the things that's not understood, among many things that are not understood about brain injuries, is how many of them there are and how many of them go undiagnosed and untreated. The United States government indicates that there are at least 1.7 million traumatic brain injuries every year, from mild to severe. And I'm sure there are many more mild ones that occur that are not in that number. Mild concussion type brain injuries can be cumulative. One of the people that we met is a former doctor who lives now in Asheville, and Cheryl Sullivan, no longer able to practice after a succession of mild concussions that began with youth sports and followed her to concussion number 5, I believe it was, when she was standing at the bottom of a ski run at the end of the day, just standing there, and her skis went out from under her, and she bumped the back of her head, and that was the end of her medical practice. So people need to be aware of how many brain injuries there are and need to be more serious in pursuit of diagnosis and treatment.
Well, that becomes the other challenge. What kind of treatment is there for such an unseen injury? When you tell me, Angela, that you're a traumatic brain injury survivor, and I look at this lovely, lovely young woman in front of me, and I say, are you telling me the truth? Is there something that's wrong with you? And so
that's part of the challenge. Is it's an invisible injury. You can't see my memory loss. You can't see my lack of attention and my focus challenges. It's the challenge that all survivors face. I received excellent rehabilitation care here in North Carolina. This was a wonderful place to begin my healing journey, to be cradled by the Blue Ridge Mountains when my bones were broken and my spirit was broken. This is an excellent place for specifically traumatic brain injuries to recover. There's a wonderful center called Care Partners. Those therapists really are your partners in care in Asheville, North Carolina. And then Pisgah Physical Therapy helped me relearn how to walk. So I'm very grateful for the wonderful support I received here. Also, this state has an exceptional Brain Injury Association of North Carolina. BIA is national. And having discovered BIA through Bianc, North Carolina, they were the first ones to bring me to Washington, D.C. to begin this career of advocacy. So when I got back to New York State, I thought, oh, well, New York City is going to be awesome. And actually, Bianc, having that as my first experience, so exceeds the national expectations. So when I went back to New York City, I was the one who encouraged and inspired going to DC for the National Brain Injury Awareness Day. And I've been there for 5 or 6 years now.
So is this a job or an advocacy position that's a volunteer position?
I consider it, I say that my career, when I used to get asked, what do you do? What do you do for a living? Where do you work? It used to bring such anxiety. I hated that question. Now I answer authentically and confidently, I'm an advocate for those affected by brain injury. And those opportunities present themselves so wonderfully. I might go to visit a friend in Mount Sinai Hospital who just had a stroke, or I might get called by my Be Honest New York City chapter to support a fundraiser. We recently had in March is Brain Injury Awareness Month, national, and we recently had March On for Brain Injury. That was a fundraiser that raised $26,000 in its first year. So I'm able to support causes that are near and dear to my heart. So I don't have a desk somewhere, I don't work at a desk, but I'm called, the opportunities present themselves.
Well, go ahead, Bill.
I wanted to point out, you asked what can be done by someone who realizes that has been diagnosed with a traumatic brain injury. Angela might touch on, you're looking at Angela almost 6 years beyond the crash. Each year has been better and better and better. And there's a common myth about brain injuries, and that is that you're as well as you're ever going to become again at the end of no more than 2 years. I can assure you, having watched her and been back and forth with her for almost 6 years now, every year gets better. And some of the things that you've done, talk about lumosity and some of the other things that you've done to retrain your brain.
What did you say? What was the term?
Lumosity.
Okay.
Lumosity is a website, LUMINOSITY, I believe.
Lumosity. Yes.
And I discovered it here in North Carolina. A friend recommended I might be interested, and it's a cognitive website. It trains specifically in areas of attention, focus, and memory. And when I first began this game, it's an online computer website. My score, my BPI, Brain Performance Index, was about 245. I had no idea how bad that was. Now I still play Lumosity, not as often, and my score, my BPI now, is about 1,450.
Oh,
So
I
it's
see.
exciting to see the gains that you
can
can
make it.
experience through training it.
Well, are there things that you can't do anymore because of your injury that you have to adjust for?
Yes, thank you for asking that question. Every survivor, there are things that we can no longer do. And then rather than focusing on what we can't do, I'd like to consider what I can do now as a result of the injury. And this is in the book, that one of the gifts that this crash has given me is, because I can't divide my attention or multitask, if you're speaking to me, you get my full and undivided attention. And that's one of the gifts from the crash. There are things that I am not able to do anymore. I don't know what they are.
Well, we talked about driving.
Yes, yes. So I recently graduated driver's rehabilitation therapy in New York City. And so I'm now allowed to rent a car or drive. I went back to New York City because I don't have to drive. Buses and subways get me wherever I want to go, and trains. So I no longer have the desire to, I truly haven't rebuilt the confidence to drive, but there's not a need to there in the city.
Well, one of the other things you've told me is that your book is going to be available for audio
Yes.
listening. And I want you to talk about one of the reasons why you're doing that.
We picked a font for that book and spacing that was comfortable for people with vision problems, which often result from a traumatic brain injury. We've got a large print version, but there are people that can't read at all. And so we've committed to doing an audio book, which ought to be available in just a couple of weeks. And we have our resource here today working on it.
So, and you're telling me that was because some of your friends who you meet through the Survivor Network have asked you to do that.
Yeah, it's been requested. Once the audiobook comes out, I can't wait. Because of vision challenges, I myself, when I first returned to New York, I had significant double vision, and that's continued to heal as I've aligned myself with an excellent neuro-optometrist in New York City. So my double vision is continually improving. But friends who really would love to connect with my story are unable to read it. And so the audio book will be very, very helpful for this audience.
Okay. So, Bill, as you move forward with this, what is your next role in traumatic brain injury advocacy?
Well, at this point, I think Angela's pretty much on her own. She, you know, I'll never let go, but she doesn't need me in the way that she once did. And we will just communicate. We'll make joint appearances should the opportunity arise. But she's perfectly capable of presenting her own story very, very nicely without my being there.
Okay. Well, I want to know more about how you see yourself moving forward. What more improvements are you making each day? Can you tell?
The improvements happen all the time. So as Bill mentioned, there's a myth that after 2 years, there's a plateau that occurs. And as he also attested, after 2010 to now, that the incredible improvements it's just so remarkable.
She studied creative writing and communications in college, graduated in 2000. She was always a good writer and a good public speaker, and that's, as we can see here today, and as you'll see in what she's written in the book, something that she's still well able to do. So she hasn't lost some of the things that are most important to her new role and to her life.
May I read a little piece to answer your question?
Please do.
I helped write the last chapter.
You wrote it.
I wrote it. And this might answer your question. I believe in the power of affirmations. Many of you might not venture a guess at the outcome of my story. At the risk of spoiling the surprise, let me tell you the end. I have very clear affirmations of the direction of my life. Number 1, I will become, and have already, an effective advocate for traumatic brain injury survivors and their families. 2, I will sing again. And 3, I will find the second love of my life. So those 3 things are happening in divine timing.
She was a karaoke star in Manhattan before the injury, and she sang Happy Birthday to me last week, and her voice is back, so I'm really happy about that for her.
So that was one of the fun entertainments that you did with your life.
Yes.
In your old Angela life.
Right, and that's one area that I continue to embrace. After the tracheotomy, if you have to have a hole stabbed through your throat in order to breathe, it's a fair trade-off to not have the same singing voice. So from my own ear, I judge the sound because I know what it once sounded like at karaoke. And my husband was a talented musician, so I'm so grateful. He recorded some songs with me singing. So I have our voices together forever. The new voice is different, and that's okay.
But it's not a bad voice.
Right.
It's not a bad voice. Bill, I want you to talk to me again about how you went from, you got Angela to consent to this story.
Right.
One of the things writers always have to deal with are the basics of, okay, from my idea in my typewriter or computer to getting it finally into print.
There were a lot of gaps created because her recall was spotty at best. She can't, to this day, I think, Angela, remember your wedding?
Right.
It occurred here at Camp Tonawanda, but she can't remember the wedding. She remembers
beautiful wedding pictures and honeymoon albums, and it's as if I'm looking at somebody else's. I see it's my face, and she's got rocking hair, and the groom has a handsome suit on, but I don't recall the emotions connected with those images yet.
And one of the things that made researching and writing the story a little bit more difficult was I had to decide, do I fill in those gaps with the memories about those events of other people, or do I just identify that there's a gap here caused by her injury? And I chose the latter. We don't try to fill in or fictionalize any of it. This is very real stuff.
Just what happened to you on that day. Where have you been promoting your book? I know you go to some of the conventions with traumatic brain injured people.
The book was just released in January, and we're really just getting rolling with the promotion. And I think the best is yet to come. Angela's more on the road this year than she was last, and so she'll be carrying the book with her wherever she goes, as will I.
So, and as you do this traveling all the time, I want you to tell me some of the things that happened to you, to new Angela, that because I can see you enjoying this new adventure, I want you to tell me some of the new adventures of Angela. When you take a trip, do you travel alone or do you travel with somebody?
I travel alone. There are a couple of new tricks that I've developed because I'm not always thorough with my packing. Whenever I take a trip, I now rely on a packing list. So I always consult this list, packing for this trip, matter of fact. So there are a couple of things that are new strategies I've developed with cognitive remediation. I'm still in outpatient therapy at NYU Langone, and I receive cognitive remediation weekly. And so in this group, we develop strategies on how to improve things that are difficult for us now.
Some very important physicians that have worked with Angela have learned a lot from her, and they continue to track her, which is really, and meet with her. It's really a compliment to her, Dr. Flanagan, and some of the others.
Well, that was the question. Because you seem to be breaking through this glass ceiling of survivorship, I wondered if you have drawn the attention of the professionals in the field.
I have, thank you. And my rehabilitation physician, the reason I came back to New York is Dr. Stephen Flanagan. And I discovered Flanagan when I was with you at a conference in North Carolina. Leigh Woodruff was speaking about her book, and I asked her, and I had severe double vision, so I was sitting in the front row, and I raised my hand modestly and asked, "Who would you? I'm thinking about moving back to New York City. Who would you recommend?" And he was the physician for Bob Woodruff. So she said, "Stephen Flanagan." I went back. I did some Googling, found his phone number. And when I called his secretary, she said, "Who referred you?" And I said, "Leigh Woodruff." I had no idea how powerful that name dropping was going to be. And he's gone on to, we've done radio interviews together. We've done wonderful advocacy work together. And that's, I'm so grateful for the relationships that continue to unfold.
This is a really important point. Angela's been the quarterback on her team right along, reaching out to the resources that she knew she needed. If you wait for resources to show up at your door, you're going to have a long wait. So she knows what she needs and goes after it and gets it.
Well, Bill has just defined exactly what advocacy is for the other people that you meet, isn't it?
Yeah.
Do you do the same kind of work and encourage those survivors to reach out to the kind of professional support that they need?
Yes, if there's ever a survivor that I can tell they're lacking support in one area, I might ask, where do you receive your medical treatments? What kind of therapies are you in? And then I often try to align them with a Beyonc. So if it's not North Carolina, Beyonce, getting them involved in a state brain injury association is very helpful and beneficial.
So with all the things that you have learned, Bill, what is your final message that you have to speak to what you've learned?
Biggest point is, don't think of Angela as 1 in 100 million. She's done great things, but she's not the only survivor who has done great things. So use her as an example, but not the only example, because there are many, many success stories out there.
And your last message, Angela?
My last message, that no matter what your challenge is, no matter if it's a health challenge, a marital challenge, a professional challenge, that it is possible to manifest the best and highest outcome, that I am grateful to be able to serve as an example. I'm an inspiration to many, and I want to encourage anyone on whatever journey and path they might be to know that you can succeed.
Well, you start by being almost in cheerleader mode when I met you, and I'm sure that's how you greet everybody, so that they are encouraged by the attitude that you bring and they become believers that your message is truly the good message that they should be listening to. Well, as I told you, when I met you, Bill is your biggest fan, the president of the Angela Fan Club, and 2 advocates for traumatic brain injury survivors, Angela Leigh Tucker and Bill Ramsey. Thank you, and thank you all very much for joining us for Blue Ridge Bookfest Book Reviews.